Greetings, mortals, and welcome back to the Library of Gnosis. I'm your host, Simeon, and it's a beautiful day full of opportunity. Today, I have with me an author and fellow Gnostic content creator. Go ahead and introduce yourself, mate. The floor is yours.
Many blessings, Simeon, and thank you for having me. I'm Nathan Wilson, also a bishop for the Gnostic Union. Used to be a bishop for the Gnostic Catholic Union, but that's disbanded, so I'm somewhat taking it into a new direction. That's just titles aside. I consider myself a Gnostic, which is more important than any degree or title. So we're all priests or monks, really, as Gnostics. We're all basically scholars. We go directly to the source. So yeah, I am an author as well. I also make biblical manuscripts as well. So I like to donate some of that to charity as well. And I like to discuss the various forms of Judaism during the time of Jesus, and especially the various forms of Christianity and the Canaanites, also alternative translations of biblical text.
Yeah, you know Greek, right?
Not really. I might know like a few prayers and stuff like that, and a few basic words. I use a translator to help me translate, and I also use a dictionary. Got to use that. I also use an encyclopedia, but I'll use 2 or 3 encyclopedias, and I might use, say, 2 or 3 dictionaries. And then what I'll also use is I'll use all the alternative like versions of the Bible with their translation also as a guide. And from there, I'll basically use sentence to sentence and word from word. And I'll start decoding it and looking at its various meanings. Say, when I come across the word logos, I'll leave it there in Greek because of its powerful symbolism. Or if I come across the term leistes, which doesn't mean thief, and a lot of English authors have placed that word as thief, but it means rebel, pirate, a bandit, a predator, a revolutionist, a guerrilla warfare fighter, etc., etc. So I place all those alternative meanings so that way the people who read it can decide for themselves what the word actually means to them. So something I like to do.
Yeah, I always use the interlinear for the whole Bible changes once you use an interlinear. It's not telling the same story, not at all.
The interlinear one's not too bad, actually. It's pretty close to the Greek. Sometimes I can use their translation, but not all the time. There's still words they have messed up with. That's normal. Like, I think that Bible's more reliable than the King James one, to be honest. Like, a lot more reliable. Because at least, say, if you use the interlinear one online, you can get the Greek alongside it. That's what I use as well, so.
Yeah. I've mostly done it for the Old Testament, but I've done some for the New, like for we wrestle not against flesh and blood. This is from the Geneva Bible, but against principalities, against worldly governors, and that word for worldly governors is archos, I believe.
Yeah, and that would be for archon, basically, head of state or politician, etc.
Yeah,
always leave
worldly governor. It's interesting that the Gnostics adopted that language to be metaphysical.
Yes, very symbolic, especially with the Greek. And I see why, especially with the New Testament. Old Testament wise, originally written in Hebrew and Aramaic. There were some texts floating around originally written in Greek as well, but sometimes that's up for debate. Scholars always argue. New Testament originally written in Greek. You had a few floating around that were written in Syriac Aramaic as well, but we don't have anything as old as the Greek, and we have the Greeks being considered basically, actually reworded that. The disciples were scared that Jesus would leave them in favor for teaching the Greeks. So he had Greek followers, he had Canaanite followers. One of the disciples, Simon the Zealot, was a Canaanite. You had Luke, he was possibly a Greek, more likely he was a Hellenistic Jew. So that means, Greek influence on the Jewish religion. And he was a doctor as well. A lot of people don't actually speak about that. So it makes a lot of sense when you go look at Jesus healing. Most of the time you come across the word, butcher, therapio. Now, that word, long story short, means to render medical service to, like a doctor. It could also mean to minister to them, so preach to them, divinely heal them. It can be simply healing them with herbs, which I consider very likely, especially if he had a doctor following him. I see him being raised in Jewish traditions. They were raised around frankincense, myrrh, cannabis, other such narcotics in the time as well, especially if he had Canaanites following him, because in their temple traditions, they were known for their medicine. They were pretty ahead of their time. You have one of your favorite groups that you like discussing, the Phoenicians. They were a Canaanite people, a Semitic people. They were also known for their medicine. They were known for their dyeing. That's why the name Phoenician, which is Greek in origin, comes from their dyes that they were making. So we even had Hannibal, which is a name after who is, what's the word for it? Loved by Baal, basically. I wrote it down somewhere. One who is favored by Baal, and some Hebrews, Israelites, followed him as well, because to them that could also translate to them who was favored by the Lord. So,
well, even wasn't does it says in Matthew 1:23, he shall be called Emmanuel.
yeah.
Right? So that's El is a Canaanite god, Phoenician.
Some Canaanites also rejected El in the end because he was too merciful and loving and compassionate. And because a lot of Canaanites, this is the same for Israelites, they liked raiding, especially early on. They liked stealing from their neighbors, etc., like everyone did. So El was too merciful. They couldn't have that because they couldn't go off raiding. So some rejected him, and some favored Yahweh and then Baal. Others rejected Baal later on and started worshipping Yahweh. A lot of problems came from the Yahwist cults. We had them recorded by the Sashu of Yahweh in Egypt as troublemakers and bandits known for kidnapping women, children, raiding. They were pirates. And it actually makes sense because if you look at, say, the Essenes, they had a different belief of Abraham. For instance, they believed Abraham was peaceful. But then you go to, say, the Zealot look or the Pharisees and Sadducees, they believed that Abraham was a conqueror coming from old Canaanite legends. And that's why I say, I think it's Genesis 14.13, I believe it is. It states in the Greek Septuagint, Abraham the Pirate, which is associated with the Euphrates River, which was used for the Canaanites and later on by Muslims for piracy. So it would basically mean Abraham the pirate, not Abraham the Hebrew. So they would retranslate that back later to modern Hebrew, which would not be the same as ancient Hebrew. So censorship as well. Also, there was a lot of text in the Septuagint that favored Christianity. Also, you find many Gnostic elements as well. And you can clearly see that the authors of the Old Testament, same with the New Testament, were multiple different authors. So that would also mean different groups of Judaism. As during the time of Jesus, you had the Pharisees, Sadducees, Essenes, you had Hellenistic Jews. You then had also the Zealots, Syriac Jews, Samaritan Jews. You had the Nazareans. You had what I like to term, it's kind of a lazy scholar armchair term use for it, Canaanite Jews. And I like to use that because it shocks people. So it's more a shock damage term. It just means Canaanites that were practicing Judaism or who had Canaanite ancestry. But the Jewish people, again, were Canaanites. Hebrew was the last surviving Canaanite language. So, you know.
Yeah, Yahweh was originally a Canaanite god, so.
Yep.
Without a doubt.
100%, I agree. Some scholars argue that he might have come from some Arab traditions, but a lot of them overlook the Egyptian records, and it screams Canaanite. And not all Canaanites were bad. Some of them were considered just and considered their gods just. They weren't all these people that were considered homosexuals eating shrimp. That's just Bible propaganda bullshit, you know, insulting their own people, really.
Yeah. History is written by the victors, as they say.
Yes, basically, yes.
I know some Greco-Egyptian or Hellenistic, I can't remember, Greco something, considered Yahweh to be the Egyptian god Seth, god of chaos and deserts.
Yeah, and a lot of Gnostics took that opinion too. And also, you had the Margarites. They believed that Yahweh was the demiurge, not evil. He was just an angel acting under a command of a god that was above him that he didn't really understand or know himself. So that was interesting. That's 1st century BC era. So they're like the ancestors of the Essenes, or one of them. So they are an Essene faction because splits, making more groups that were called Essenes, but they're beforehand. So That's interesting. But again, you had different types of Essenes. Some were vegetarian, others were pescatarian, refusing to eat any land animal, believing that fish were a gift of God, which is quite interesting because the Cathar had the same belief. Marcion as well believed that fish simply split in half and multiplied. They didn't have sex, and thus they would eat it, considering not having a soul in it. Not all of them had that tradition. Some completely refused to eat all meat. You had some that also sacrificed, but they were more zealot Essenes. So more association branches, which is very interesting. A lot of them were found around the Qumran community. So they weren't just one community. There was a whole bunch of different communities living in the area just labeled as one group. You had all these different philosophies when it came to the Essenes, and the same thing with the Gnostics.
Is that symbolic that they multiplied, or because had they now figured out that fish has caviar and that's eggs?
Yeah, well, I guess some of them didn't actually really see what the ocean was like. Not everyone traveled. So I would have put that down to lack of sightseeing or myth. But it's interesting they still had that approach. So you had a lot that completely disbanded that and did say fish had sex. So I'm guessing that would just be a matter of belief, and ignorance can be bliss, I guess. So it is interesting. But then you have Jesus stating it doesn't matter what goes into your mouth, but what comes out of it. I think he was similar to Buddha. I think he might have taken on the Essene approach, probably pescatarian. I think more likely was probably vegetarian upbringing, like his family was, like James the Just, and also Peter becoming vegetarian later. I think he was like Buddha in the sense he would eat what was offered to him, as he also states, eat what was presented before you if they welcome you. Buddha was the same. He loved pork, but he didn't like the suffering of animals. So he didn't go off, eat it himself, but if you offer to him, that was like his cheat code. So that's pretty clever. So you get to enjoy himself as well. So I think Jesus was the same, telling people not to push it to these extremes and rather place their own faith with God through the spirit within. He was very much a mystic, and I also see a lot of censorship in regarding to the story of Jesus. I think that, honestly, in regards to the Jewish temple at the time, I think it was quite corrupt because you had some Essenes that would have nothing to do with the temple. They lived out in the wilderness. Some zealots completely avoided it too and would assassinate some of the Herodians that believed that King Herod was the Messiah. You had Essenes that did go to the temple. But I see it was Jesus' actions in the temple, for instance, that got him killed. You've seen some of my theories on the temple scene. I think he was the first of his time to challenge the ancient sex trade, if you will, with temple virgin brides, also known as the Jewish school of temple virgins, which were traditionally young girls from nobility, from the line of David, or just from noble families, placed in the temple at the ages of 3, raised there to 14, and married at 14, sometimes even at the ages of 3 by the high priest themselves. They were often called doves, not all the time though. Mary the Virgin was also one of these temple virgins. If you read the proto-gospel of James, there's also mentioning of her being offered to the temple. I believe it's in the gospel of Luke, maybe I forgot which gospel mentions it, but the proto-gospel of James has Mary placed in the temple at the age of 3, and she's described as a dove dwelling in the temple. By the 5th century BC era, before Jesus, and 5th century AD, after Jesus' death, we have virgin brides, mostly priestesses and even goddesses, being called doves. The Holy Spirit as well, a reference to a dove. So I think these doves being sold weren't just sacrificial animals, as you don't get placed on a cross as a rebel for releasing a few birds. I think that he was saving the children, and he was cracking a shit because this is the place that his mother was a victim of. So I think these children in Matthew 21:12 to 17, the children shouting in the temple, save us. I think these are the child brides asking Jesus to save them from the corrupt nobility, which he whipped with leather straps, I believe would be the tefillin, which Jewish people would wrap around their arms, and that dates back to the 2nd century BC era, which would really hurt if he was whipping them with that. And that's when he calls them lay states. He states that you've turned this house of God into a spalion, which means a grotto, kind of like a Playboy grotto. It can also mean a den, a cave with rivers in it, so a resort basically, a hideout. And then he says it for lay states, meaning predators. So he said that you've turned this prayer house into a den for predators. And then you've got children shouting, save us. And then he's placed on the cross for his acts. And then if you read, I believe it's either in Gospel of John, he states, it could be Luke, I believe it's John, he states that I am Jesus, arrest me, do not touch the others. So I believe that he was protecting children, because if you see in the temple scene in Mark, we also have Jesus stopping them from taking the vessels out in the courtyard. And then when they come to arrest him, he states that you have to come out with swords and clubs to arrest me as if I was a Lagstace, a predator, basically like a predator like you. I was in the temple for days and you did not touch me. And I also see the actions of early Christians saving children. Simon Magus rescued his wife from a brothel. So I see a lot of these Christians trying to be like Jesus in a result. So I think this is why Jesus was also killed and why we have a lot of censorship, because I also believe we have the censorship in order because the Catholic Church would later run brothels in the medieval century. So I think that's why the word thief will be used. And that would be around the 4th century as well. So Dark Age times, they would start running brothels. And that was coincidentally was when they would start writing the Bible in Latin instead of using Greek. So my 2 cents.
Yeah. That was great. You mentioned Buddha earlier. Some say, and I suspect he's depicted blue-eyed, with blue eyes. Some say there's evidence to point towards him being of the Scythian lineage, and the Sumerians and the later Canaanites also from that Scythian lineage, from what I understand at least. Greeks as well, I guess.
Very mixed people.
Yeah, it fits in with the Phoenicians being using cannabis, because the Scythians used to build a teepee and then throw cannabis at the flames and imbue the smoke.
And the ancient Israelites were doing the same thing as well. They were burning cannabis inside their temples. There's a 5th century BC era temple dedicated to Yahweh and Asherah, and they found burnt frankincense and cannabis there, and myrrh, I believe, as well, on the shrine, which they would inhale to receive their visions. The Zoroastrians, which were quite interesting, as Cyrus the Great was a Zoroastrian Persian king, that many of the Israelites believed to be the Messiah. And the Zoroastrians were known for their inhaling of cannabis mixed in with opium as well. They were said to be the basically biggest drug dealers of their time, which is crazy. So they visited Jesus with gold, frankincense, and myrrh. If that story is even true, I don't think so. But if it did happen, I say that they believe that Jesus was a reincarnation of Zoroaster, their prophet, following stars. But I think it's more likely to consider Zoroastrianism a legitimate faith. So believing that they worship the same God. And that's what I think is really going on. So
Timothy Hogan said something about that Frankenstein gold and myrrh, that it was used by the Egyptians for, like, I don't know if it was for burials or something like that, for the kings.
Yep, they would also use it for kings as well. So they would use that for anointing as well. Myrrh was also one of the main ingredients for ancient sex drugs too, which is quite interesting because it is a stimulant, or can be used as a stimulant. And if you see the scene when, I believe it's in Gospel Matthew actually, when Jesus is on the cross, when they place a sponge and they try to lift up to him. Well, if you read the text, they try to give him, it can translate to wine or neos, but it can also translate to potion, love potion. And if you mix it in with myrrh, that's definitely a love potion. So in other words, they're trying to give Jesus an erection on the cross. So they're trying to punish him, make him look dirty as well. Also, people were naked on the cross back then. They were left there to decompose. He was on there quite short. And then in the Gospel of John, I believe it is, he states he's thirsty. And they give him an antidote. That's kind of sus, a potion and an antidote. I'm one for the swoon theory. I think that he most likely survived the crucifixion because the women were waiting there for him. And it does state in the Greek text that it can translate to they were waiting there to lend him assistance, which is very interesting. So if people go check out my translations, they can compare it with the Greek and double check for themselves. But Mary Magdalene, she also goes to the tomb with aloe vera and oils. Jewish traditions for burial of the dead is just to wash it with water. So that screams something's going on. So I think there's an inside job there that they tried to attempt to save him. I think he survived the crucifixion, but I think he died from his wounds. I think that the stab to a guts, if he got stabbed by a spear, would be a bit difficult to survive back then. So if he did, I think he did, because it takes a long time to die on the cross. He was on there for 6 hours. That makes him the shortest death recorded on the cross, which is interesting. So, and Romans left them to rot and fall apart unless you bribe them for the body. So there's some people that believe that Jesus wanted to be crucified in a sense. So basically planned it. There's probably a chance he wanted to be basically announced as king in the temple scene when he's freed the children. He's taken a crowd with him. He was hoping they would all announce him king. I think maybe it's possibly he planned the crucifixion as a fail-safe. They think he's dead. He rises up. They think he's God. They give Jerusalem their freedom, basically. So he would be seen as a demigod. So they would give him basically equal rights somewhat, or make them basically independent nation, an ally, basically. Possibly. I'm not saying that's true. It might not be. But it could be. Some people also agree with that. It goes in with the swoon theory. But I purposely think that he did survive and he died from his wounds. So that's my thing. I also think Mary Magdalene was not one who was possessed by 7 demons, as the word daemon or daimonos does not mean demon. It means God, lesser God, demigod, spirit, also guiding spirit, someone who's been gifted by a god, an angelic being, someone who's been deified after death. So I believe that Mary Magdalene was a Canaanite who worshipped 7 different gods, left them behind, followed Jesus. Makes much more sense. So I think that makes a lot more sense with her going there with herbs. If she was a temple priestess or one who was in charge of a temple, she would definitely know medicine. So this makes a lot more sense scientifically to me. So I think they were also possibly married. I think they were. Because another red flag that screams that they were is it was illegal for a woman to touch a naked man's body. So she wouldn't be going to the tomb of Jesus to touch his naked body unless she was married to him or family. So not adopted in, it would still be weird. That would be no, she'd been told to wait outside. So that screams wife.
Yeah, according to Timothy Hogan, Mary and John the Baptist first had a child. Then later, Jesus, he survived the crucifixion or died, resurrected. I don't know. He didn't say anything about that part. Anyways, after that, he and Mary had children. They went away, you know. And Hogan claims they found the Templars found the bones, the other boxes with the bones which they collected, and the burial place was found again in the 1980s, but the boxes were empty.
Well, regarding that one, if it's a tomb I'm thinking about as well, there was, I don't know if it might be another one, because there was one that they found, and they reckon it was his family tomb, and there was a grave missing, but they reckon they found it and it was James the Just. No guarantee that it belonged to that tomb though. But in that tomb, they found a son of Jesus, and they found his wife Mary buried with him, so Mary Magdalene. But that was a common name as well, so it might not be. But I think probably it was, very likely. Another red flag that screams that it possibly was the man who helped Jesus carry a cross. Wasn't it Simon or Simeon? Oh, actually, I can't remember now. Shit. Well, the man, I think it might be Simon who helped Jesus carry his cross.
Yeah.
Well, they found his tomb, and the markings he had on there were the same markings they had on the Jesus family tomb. It was early Christian symbols, so it's very interesting. So if they weren't the family of Jesus, then these guys were early Christians. But if it was Jesus and his family, they're going to scream no. It's like basically when they discovered the Gospel of Thomas. No, it's forgery. It's not. So it's because it didn't agree with them at first. They didn't even like the person that translated it at first. So they had to apologize to the translator because he thought he made it up. But it's very likely that, and this opinion is growing in scholars now, that these are actual words of Jesus himself. But these same scholars believe that only 15 or 20% of the words from Jesus out of the biblical canon are authentic, and all the rest are church add-ins. But even with a lot of Jesus sayings within the biblical canon, there's a lot of Gnostic stuff in there. You see Jesus stating Gnosis. You also see the Pharisees and scribes state, maybe, they say, where does his wisdom come from? Yes. But if so, where does his spiritual wisdom come from? But it would also, to a Gnostic, they would say, where does this Sophia come from? As these Pharisees and Sadducees would not know Sophia. The only ones that would know that would be Gnostic Jews, basically. So, but not all had that concept. Some had a Zoe. So even the traditions of Sophia, the monad, they would all evolve throughout time. So it's hard to pinpoint something authentically. And even with regards of the Jesus family, with what you mentioned before, with the Mary marrying John, some even believe that Jesus had kids himself to Mary, and that she possibly even went with Peter as well. I don't really believe that as well. There's a lot of traditions and a lot of beliefs in regarding what happened as well. But there's something interesting a lot of people do ignore, and it's the early movement leaders of Christian communities that are the descendants of James the Just, Jesus' brother, and Jesus' brother Jude. They had kids, and they had kids. So that went on for a while, and then out of nowhere, the Roman Church took control, and they took control of the Bishop of Jerusalem, basically, and they moved it to Rome. So that's interesting.
Yeah.
So I support, I suppose, a hijacking of the temple, basically, or the Christian movement, I should say, the community. So that's interesting when you see the descendants of him. So James' descendants died off, and then Jude's descendants started leading the church, and early church fathers were bitching about them not being the same form of Christianity as them because they were Jewish Christians. So that's interesting. I believe that's some of it was Origen, and I forgot his name now, but he wrote the biography of Constantine the Great. He was a church father and bishop. I got his name now. Might come back to it later. But yeah, he wrote about them and complained, which is very funny. They also complained about the Gnostics, and they're much older than Orthodox. We have 200 years before their Christian Bible, the New Testament was even written. Marcion, or Gnostic Christian, or possibly someone who was aligned to Gnostic thought, wrote the first Christian New Testament 200 years before them. And he got kicked out of the church because he did a little no-no. He exposed the mysteries with 10,000 people out in public. He gave them a psychedelic wine, and all these Christians recorded seeing angels and Jesus descending down from heaven. So I actually think the Catholic Church were doing the same ceremony because he released it publicly. They changed it into normal wine, which wouldn't surprise me at all. There's even some scholars that think that the Catholic ceremonies, their use of relics and their Eucharist that they use with the vessels, probably came from Simon Magus. Possibly, who knows? There was a lot of censorship with Simon Magus as well. He was baptized by Timothy, a disciple of Jesus. So he actually knew the disciples. So that was before the book of Acts, when they try to, make him in a bad way. But it doesn't really discredit him too much. He just states he tried to buy the Holy Spirit and then apologizes, and then they're all good with him, and then they leave. So it's not really too bad on Simon's part. But Paul also tried to bribe his way in too. So a lot of Simon's stories were stolen and put in with Paul, and I think Paul's story of that was sort of put into Simon Magus. So
yeah, for sure. Some say that that Paul was Apollonius of Tyana. That there were.
That's interesting as well. I haven't heard that one. That's cool. I've heard people state that was Jesus as well. So Paul one's a new one. I know a lot of Polyneus traditions they did also borrow from Christians, and there's probably likely that Christians probably borrowed from them too.
Like Gnosis, I believe Hermeticism is older than Christianity, right? It's
yes.
Like third, yeah. They use
that's the beginnings of Gnosticism, Hermeticism. That was the term that they would use before Gnostic. Otherwise they would just call them ones of pursuit in Gnosis, pursuit of knowledge, pursuit of spiritual knowledge. The Catholic Church would use the term Gnostic in order to label them to make it easier to kill them and persecute them. But the funny thing is, at first, Catholics considered people true Gnostics and other ones the false Gnostics, which were heretics. We have Marcelina, a Gnostic Christian leader of the Carpocratians, after her husband died, which is, not Carpocratians, I can't pronounce his name, Carpocrates. So after he's passed away, Marcellinus led her movement, and also her son, or possibly Carpocrates' son from his previous lover or wife. She was known for preaching the equality of men, women, and children. She was a superstar of her day. She was so popular that Pope Insidious invited her to Rome from Alexandria, Egypt, to be a grand witness as he became Pope. So it shows Gnostic Christianity had a huge part to play with Christianity until late 2nd century, basically dickhead St. Irenaeus, who said there's only 4 Gospels and wanted people exiled from their homes. And because of that dickhead, we have worse heresy hunters. So all these witch trials that went on, he's to blame for it. So he was almost like Hitler of his day, in a sense. Not as extreme, he was a dick. So
Yeah. I recorded a video yesterday. Started almost finished editing it. It's about Paul's letter to the Colossians being a Catholic forgery
Yep.
because they uh, Irenaeus found the letter to Colossians just coincidentally at the same time against heresies was published.
Would you like to know another forgery a lot of people don't know? It used to be a popular Gnostic text. They reckon possibly one of the oldest Christian texts of its time, one of the first they reckon possibly. The Epistle of the Apostles, it's possibly was written by the Apostles. We don't have it though. We only have the forgery version written by the Catholic Church, which was anti-Gnostic. And then they stopped using it because they didn't want anyone to know about the Gnostics after years of suppression and after killing them. So they suppressed a lot of stuff. So they were definitely forging stuff. 7 of the letters of Paul were considered authentic, all the rest are forgeries. And we have 10 mentioned by the 2nd century. We only know about those 10 because of Marcion. And he was a huge Paul fanboy. So it's likely that we got all those letters of Paul from Marcion. Like not all 14, but those 7 considered authentic ones most likely come from him. But he probably even wrote it. Who bloody knows? But that being said, so even the married couple of, I forgot their names now, that Paul was associated with, and they were Roman. I think one might be Thelsia or Thracia. I forgot her name. Not Thelsa, because that was one of his followers, which there was a gospel written by her as well, which was banned. But the long story short, these 2 Roman couples, or maybe they were Thracian couples, I think they might have been Thracian. Paul, that was associated with him, that was friends with them. Well, the funny thing is here, Simon Magus was the one that married them. I wish I wrote down their names actually now. So there's definitely borrowing of Simon Magus' story with Paul's story. And if Paul was not Simon Magus, they definitely would have gone along with some things and would have seen eye to eye with some things. Some things no. But a lot of Paul's stories contradict because of the church edits. There's Jesus words that contradict, where he states those who live by the sword die by the sword. Then later on we have the church edit saying sell your shirt and buy a sword. It's like, so we had different followers of Jesus too that had their own ideas as well. Gospel of John begins straight up Gnostic. In the beginning there was God and the Logos, which is kind of funny, that would come from the Carpocratians that believed that there was the monad, God, the Logos, which would later become Christ, and Zoe being the Sophia, or the Holy Spirit. But Simon Magus believed that originally the Logos was Moses, and then when Christ was crucified, he became basically deified, and he became the Logos. So he became greater than Moses, and which is very interesting. So Simon Magus had an early belief as well. So he was leading the early Christians as well himself. So he had a very mixed belief that eventually evolved over time as well. There's very good evidence that states that he possibly wrote a lot of the Great Declaration, which is interesting as well, a Gnostic work. We have other writings, I think it's not Celsius, I think it is, or it might be Celsius or Celthus. It was meant to be a follower of John, the disciple, and he's credited to be the author of Revelation, and Irenaeus states that he cannot have written it. He fits the timeline of the Gospel of Revelation and Gospel of John being written. So a lot of the text Gnostic, because the earliest texts were written by the Gnostics. They're the first paper bearers of Europe. So it's interesting. So they were the first to write. They loved their education. They liked seeking knowledge. They would meet up in secret to discuss maths. They were super nerds,
Yeah. It's like Dungeons and Dragons party, right?
Yeah. They were beautiful though. They were non-violent. It wasn't until you had the Porcinians, which were big Paul fanboys as well. They were the Gnostics that would fight back, and they were renowned warriors. Muslims were kind of scared of them. Christians were scared of them, and even sort of Jews. And the funny thing is, Christians, Jews, and Muslims would all call these guys Muslims, Christians, or Jews. And Muslims are like, nah, they're not Muslim, they're Christian. Christians are like, nah, they're Muslim. Jews are like, nah, they're Christians, and etc. But they were Gnostics. And they're basically the beginnings of what would form into Protestantism. But before this, even with the Cathar incident, which came later, they were peaceful as well, non-violent. There were a few that did fight back, but it was Catholics that were defending them. But early Christianity, early Gnostics, they were non-violent, peaceful. The only time I seen that they actually did something that was basically still peaceful, but not peaceful in the sense of you're not going to get a slap. Basically, was rescuing kids from pagan brothels. One reason they were burnt by Nero as human candles. He seen them as a nuisance, as rebellious. So that's why they were being killed as well. There were also Christians that were demanding to be martyred as well. There was one Roman politician that said, "You miserable wenches, go drown yourselves," because he didn't want to have more killed. So he's like, "Go home." So it's like a little defeat to some of those Christian mobs. So some Gnostics didn't want to be martyred. They were warning against it. So very interesting. But they were known for their preaching of equality of men, women, and children. So they were the free thinkers of their time. Very stoic in a sense. Very intelligent. So they recognized right from wrong. A lot of them wanted to escape this world because they seen it so messed up. They seen it as the illusion. And a lot of life we see around us isn't illusion. Even our own thoughts, we come to our own progressions of awakening.
I wonder what the Hermeticists must have been around at this time too. I wonder what they would have thought of Jesus calling himself the Good Shepherd and the Logos.
Yeah, well, a lot of them liked him. So I don't think he probably called himself Logos. I think when I've read the text, like once or twice he stated Logos to you. So God's reasoning a word. I think that people, like, you definitely see him being called Logos. I see him only calling himself Son of Man. So it's interesting. But yeah, definitely they would have seen connections. You had Gnostics and Egyptians that believed that he was a reincarnation of Trismegistus and Hermes. So Thoth and Hermes. And some even Indians believed there was a reincarnation of Buddha or even Krishna. So we had all different traditions back in ancient past as well. But yeah, we had some similarities of him as well. So definitely some scenes. The Egyptians loved the Gnostics. They also loved the Coptic Christians. Some Egyptians viewed Christianity as just a continue-on of their religion. So, which is pretty cool. So early Christianity was very open-minded. It wasn't until we had Orthodoxy that came into the picture, Proto-Orthodoxy, which is the beginning of the Roman Catholic Church, that we had problems. So they're the guys that cause problems. So the Gnostics, they loved everyone, basically. Some of them were very anti-Jewish God. They weren't anti-Jewish people, but they were anti-Jewish God. They were anti-Yahweh. Some also liked Yahweh too. So it's, depending on the version you look at, some believed that Yahweh was another name for El, carried on with that Jewish tradition. Others believed that Yahweh was the demiurge. Others believed that Yahweh was a vengeful, jealous, evil archon or Yadabaoth. The demiurge was evil. Others believed that he wasn't fully evil. He was just ignorant, and that Christ would come and bring him repentance too, which is interesting. So we had all these different beliefs, but mostly the idea that God was incomprehensible and unknowable by us humans. The part of God that you understood was the spirit within your soul, which was an image of God, which returns there. So that is which is eternal. They were ones that disregard this flesh, where you had the same belief with the Essenes or Gnostic Jews before them. The mystics believing that the soul was eternal. But then you had the Pharisees and Sadducees believe once you were dead, that was it. But the Pharisees and Zealots, they were big on the belief that the body would resurrect with the dead. There were even some early Gnostics that believed that Jesus' body would resurrect along with everyone else, and that it was the Christ spirit that possessed him and then went back to the Father. Or even believed that Jesus didn't actually have a body, and that he was the Christ spirit or the Logos that was sent here. It only appeared to have a body, and either Jesus was crucified or it was Simon, or they thought they crucified him because he gave him an image of something. So he also had Valentinus, who was a believer that Jesus had a spiritual body in a sense, so not quite flesh as we would see it, so it was pure, so he didn't need to take a poo. We had Catholics that believed the same thing too, that argued over Jesus not taking a poo and weed, and people died over that, over the argument of Jesus defecating. We had St. Nicholas punch one of the Arian Christians in the face because he believed that Jesus was a spirit, and thus Jesus had no reason to defecate. And so the person we now call Santa Claus punched him in the face, and he got kicked out of the Council of Nicaea, which is where they were kind of deciding the canon. It wasn't as simple as that. You had 11 councils that took place after that as well. So the canon was always evolving. They would later add Revelation, when at first many of them rejected it as Gnostic. So which is interesting as well. We have very Gnostic elements, and as the Gnostics warned about the growing influence of the Catholic Church, we find this in Revelation, the mark of the beast. In Greek, these words mean something different. It means a rank and order, or a rank and poisonous animal. That screams someone's usurping their movement. The poisonous animal is the Roman Catholic Church, the Romans, that are usurping it. So that's my view of that. It's nothing to do with these creatures or anything like that. It was most likely written on psychedelics. The island of Patmos used to be home to magic mushrooms because the Romans stamped them out and destroyed it. They were importing mushrooms from the island nearby so people could get high and receive their visions. The flesh of the gods or flesh of God. Some Gnostics even believed that Jesus was a magic mushroom, which is weird. Some believed that the tree of knowledge was a magic mushroom. Some campfire, which were in medieval time, had this belief. And that was what gave Adam and Eve the vision. We also had some that didn't believe in Adam and Eve, and it was pure symbolism. We had some that didn't believe in demiurge, that the demiurge was symbolic for our own ego and our lower self and our own desire to be God. We had some that did believe he existed. We had some that believed that archons and Yaldabaoth was trapping human souls. We had others that didn't believe this, that just the soul kept reincarnating until it connected with God and discovered itself and became like Christ for their own selves. Again, different beliefs, different theologies, which is the awesome thing about Gnosticism. We don't hate on each other like the Roman Catholics and some of the Orthodox and our Protestant cousins.
Who were the Gnostics that like believed through like salvation through sin? Wasn't there a Christian group who believed like because the body is like sin, you need to commit sins to like free yourself or something like that?
Yes. There were some that believed that too. Rarer groups, you had some of Carpocratians that believed that, but a lot of it was church propaganda to state them all as one group. Some did believe you had to escape sin in order to sin. So you had to sin in order to be saved. And not all had this approach. Some Carpocratians rejected sex or just rejected having kids because this world was too corrupt, but they all wanted to be like Jesus. So I don't see them so much doing like massive gay orgies or anything like that. I see them, they were fine, a lot of them, with homosexuality, but they didn't have a term for it back then, like until the Catholic Church. So when that term came about, they were fine with them. They didn't mind. Well, they didn't say homosexuality. They called them, it's a word for it that they used back then. Sodomite.
Sodomite, yeah. Sodomite.
So they didn't mind them so much.
On YouTube here.
Yeah, sorry, I'll keep that thing. So it's just a word that they use. People, language evolves over time. It's like the words that we use. But yeah, we had some that were fine with sexual equality, that wanted you to engage with yourself because they believed that love was a form of worship. So others condemned it too. So
I just brought up that group that to show how varied the people who were considered Gnostics were, and not everybody was best boy, God's best dog, if you put it like that.
Like the Barbarites as well, they get a bad name as well in one of their texts, which Catholic Church propaganda this to be able to kill them. They say that they were drinking semen as a part of the Eucharist. That's pure propaganda. They wanted to be like Jesus themselves. So these were good-hearted people that were known for their acts of poverty, charity, fasting. Some of them were delving into psychedelics, which is what gave them the bad name. But they definitely weren't they weren't like Canaanites. They stated the Canaanites were all gay. No, some of them were vegetarian. Some of them were very Essene, and some of them actually became Essenes. So the Essenes welcomed them in. They were more open-minded, but then you had the other Jews like, no. Racist in a sense, what we would call now, or simplistic. They were very aggressive. But again, that was a problem with the Yahwist cults, and that's why you see Jesus in John 8:44 state that you worship your father who's the devil. He would state about this about his own God. Why would he call his father the devil? So he's calling their father the devil, which is Yahweh. So very interesting. Also, Jesus states in the Gospel of Matthew, I believe it's in 18 somewhere, he states that whoever causes a child to stumble, or it can also translate to whoever causes harm to a child should tie a millstone around their neck and drown themselves. When we go to Numbers 31.32 to 35, we have Yahweh demanding 16,000 virgins to to be forced into marriages by soldiers of Moses, so orders of Moses through Yahweh, and then 32 for himself. Most scholars agree to be sacrificed, possibly to be placed in the temple as virgin brides. So long story short, virgins back then were aged 3 to 14. So that makes Yahweh a god of child marriage and virgin sacrifice. In Judges 11.30, we have Jafar offering him the first person that comes out of his house as a burnt human offering, a human sacrifice, and then sacrifices his virgin daughter. So this is not the God of Jesus who rejects sacrifices. He rejects human sacrificing. We even had some Baal worshippers, which Baal gets a negative name. A lot of them rejected human sacrificing too, but some did favor human sacrificing. The term Moloch, people argue over that. If you replace that word with child sacrifice Baal, it makes more sense. So that means that particular Baal was one of human sacrifice. We had others that believed he was just and loving, that cared for his people. So we had different versions of him, like Yahweh, different versions of Yahweh too. So, which is funny. It's all just propaganda mostly. But again, this variation of Yahweh and Baal, or Baal that was doing child sacrificing, that was the brother of that Yahweh, which is hilarious. And he was also doing child sacrificing because they were brothers. We also had beliefs of El that also did sacrificing too. We had different variations of what El was. So even what we call the Phoenicians, these Semitic people, again, that's what the Greeks called them. They would have called themselves Canaanites, some of them even Hebrews or Israelites. They would have even called themselves the nation that they lived in, as some of them lived over in Carthage. So they probably called themselves Carthaginian, and just they all got labeled as one group, bad name as well, some of them too. But no, they were loved. We even have the possibility that, say, if Hannibal won the war, that today the whole world would be basically speaking a Semitic language, either Hebrew or Canaanite, instead of Latin or now English, which is, who knows, which is very interesting. So I also see a lot of censorship on the Jewish people. I see why the Romans disliked them, because some Jewish people did follow Hannibal. Not all, though. So it's like Herod, where some believed he was the Messiah, not all. Herod also fought alongside the Romans and also fought against them when he joined Mark Antony and Cleopatra, and then later he would serve Augustus Caesar, stating that, look, I was loyal to Mark Antony and I fought against you knowing we would lose. I propose that I will be disloyal to you, and if not more, and he was allowed to keep his kingship. But once he fell, the Herodian faction also fell, obviously, because they believed that either him or his Messiah, well, he was the Messiah, or that someone of his dynasty would be the Messiah. So we had all these different beliefs. We also had Essenes and Zealots that made their own messiahs too. And we had different beliefs of what the Messiah was. And not all Jews even believed in the Messiah or even wanted one. Some believed that any Messiah person was a revolutionist and a troublemaker. So different beliefs, even in regards to that. We had some that believed that the Messiah would be simply anyone, didn't have to be Jewish, who helped the Jewish people or who had a greater understanding of God. We had some that believed that he had to be a king, and that he had to either convert the world to Judaism or he had to liberate the Jewish people from their conquerors during the Babylonian times, the Babylonians, which later became Cyrus the Great, and then later someone during the Roman times. We had during the Bar Kokhba revolt, whatever it's called, I forgot the name, one of the people leading the revolt, he was even believed to be a Messiah as well. So a Messiah wasn't nothing new. We had different. It wasn't a crime in regards to call yourself a Messiah. It was a crime underneath Roman law if you were stating that you were a king when they didn't choose someone to be king, as it was a puppet state of Rome. It was a client state.
Wasn't I don't know how that works. Like I can't even tell the difference between Sumerian and the Canaanite. The Canaanites came later. Wasn't Abraham originally from Sumer?
Yeah, or from Canaan. So one of them too, I believe. So it's hard to say. It's on tradition as well and belief. But yeah, some say he was a Canaanite and came from Canaan, or his family came from Canaan. Some state from Sumer. There's a lot of borrowing from the Sumerians as well, like the flood story as well, the Garden of Eden as well, the Anunnaki, the sons of Anu, and Enki. So Anunnaki, thus, so Anu and Enki. So you have the Elohim, the sons and daughters of El, the gods. So El Elyon was the father of up to 80 children in some stories, which is crazy. Him and Asherah, and some other times it's not Asherah, it's someone else, it's Ashat, which is also arguably Asherah as well, or another goddess or even Asherah and another wife. In some stories, El has multiple wives. There's one story in the Ugaritic text that states that El got too drunk and had to be carried home by the Elohim. So he was a jolly god that got too drunk and was merciful. And some Canaanites didn't like that. So we had the worship of Yahweh. But then the Israelites were also getting their asses kicked, and so were some of the Canaanites. So they started mixing Yahweh with El, or mixing in Baal with El, or mixing in Yahweh and Baal together, and then replacing Baal with Yahweh, or replacing El with Yahweh. Both Baal and Yahweh were both credited to have stolen basically El's wife. Well, not really, but they were just given it by the people, whoever wrote the story. So we have all these different stories of who God was and who his wife was, and then later on we got rid of his wife because they wanted to make it male dominated. So interesting. We also had Jews that believed that God was both masculine and female, some beyond gender, beyond sex, and had both masculine and feminine properties and were made in God's image. And that's why you also see two creation stories. So it's crazy. So it's even with the Sumerian belief, there was different beliefs of that. Some people go, oh, it's all ancient aliens. I argue to them they have not read the history of the ancient drug use and all that stuff in ancient Sumeria. They believed that they could contact their gods through magic mushrooms, the flesh of the gods. They also had temple priestesses and what we would now call temple prostitutes or sacred sex worship. They had this. Young girls, when they turned of age, were expected to go way outside the temple, outside the statue of the sex goddess or goddess of love of the Sumerian beliefs, and she would offer her services for a few gold coins. She would then give those gold coins to the temple, possibly keep a little bit for herself, and then she would ritually wash herself, and this was seen of her doing a deed to the community, because there was a chance that she would sleep with one of the gods who shape-shifted in human form, and thus bring forth a demigod who would bring great renown for the city or would bring prosperity. The Greeks believed this too. The followers of Aphrodite, which was a sex cult basically as well. Women were expected, if they didn't want to go to the ports and sleep with a sailor once a year, if they were totally submissive to the husband, they would shave their heads as a sign of they were mourning for Adonis, which was Aphrodite's lover. Otherwise, they went to the ports and slept with a random sailor, and believing that there was a chance one of those sailors was a god, was possibly Zeus, shape-shifting into human form, playing his sneaky deeds to try to sleep with women. And thus they could give birth to someone like Hercules that could bring great renown or bring a demigod into existence, or possibly even sacrifice that child as well, or serve in the priesthood. So it's crazy with the ancient world. Like if you were the father, you had full right over your child in those ancient times. If you were angry with your son, you could drag him to the temple, make him be a priest. You could kill him, sacrifice him as well. It was pretty hardcore. Abandon your kids. Gnostics were known to rescue those kids that they were abandoning because they believed that they were a gift of God. The Gnostics were beautiful people. We still are,
Anu was associated with the bull of heaven, or the bull was his symbol, and that's true of El as well.
Yeah, and Baal and Yahweh.
Yeah, and if you look, and Baal, you have Baal Hadad, you have Baal Hamon, and you have like a bunch of different Baals. Like I read on Wikipedia that scholars don't always know which Baal they're speaking about, Baal, because it was just like a title for Lord, and then you have like Baal Hamon, Baal Hadad. So it gets a bit confusing for scholars.
There was even a Baal Yahweh, so which is funny.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And from what I understand, in some stories, Baal and El were like co-regions, like different, like the transcendent and the immanent, whatever. And that's the same relationship I see with Anu and Enki. So, from what I understand, Baal Hadad, I think, is like because he was a fertility god, I believe, is Enki, which we find we find that story, that archetype of Hermes in all across the world, even in South America. He was named Wotan or something, Woden, something like that, which was the Norse, Hermes and so on. So it's all global, that kind of thing. The This is just from I read the Wikipedia site for Wikipedia page for Gnosticism, and on there it says that some early Christians saw the pre-incarnate Jesus as the angel Michael.
Yep. Some Gnostics did as well, yes, which is pretty interesting as well. And regarding with co-region you mentioned with Baal, some also believe that Baal and El were rivals, and even that Yahweh was co-regent with El as well, which is funny. So a lot of borrowing with each other. They were both ripping off each other, but it's kind of funny because the Yahweh's cults would then claim Baal was the god of feces, but technically kind of Yahweh is, because he demands his people bake bread and human poo in Ezekiel 4.12, and then states Ezekiel can use cow poo instead. So to use that as the fire to light it, and then make sure to eat that where everyone can see you. And that's the punishment every time
God.
Jewish people are in Israel. So, you know.
He's a merciful God.
Yeah.
Only cow down.
Also, the Jewish people were scared because I forgot exactly what passage in the Old Testament, but it tells you how to take a dump and how to bury it. Because if Yahweh steps in it, he will strike you down and your descendants for 3 generations. So they were quite scared. Yahweh was angry he would step in their feces, which is trippy, very weird. So there was a bit of phobia around poo, which is funny. So I don't know why. So the Jews were fighting over poo, and then the Christians started fighting over poo. Except they were arguing whether Jesus took a poo, which is weird. So I reckon that's where the Koreans, like North Korea, I reckon that's where they stole it from King John or whatever. So I reckon they borrowed it.
Yeah, I figure since he ate fish, man, I don't think that teleported out of his stomach.
Yeah, some of them believe that, basically that it would just disappear or purify somehow, which Christians did argue over. Valentinius believed that as well. But you had, say, Simon Magus. He believed that Jesus was a regular human. You had Carpocrates. Sorry, that wasn't the way you pronounce it. Hippocrates. He believed that Jesus was a regular human as well. Many Gnostics did believe that Jesus was a regular human that either became divine after his death or he obtained Gnosis, spiritual knowledge. Some even believed that the Holy Spirit possessed him or the Christ Spirit possessed him, and that was how he was able to do his miracles. Others had a more human approach, that he was a philosopher and healer. So he was healing them with herbs. I would be one for that. I take on the belief that with the term daemon, with him becoming deified after death, simply being remembered after death was being viewed as becoming a god, becoming a demigod, deified, which is interesting. So he was remembered. So even now he's still a daimonos. He's a deity. It's interesting. So the point was for you to be this construct, for you to find Christ within you when you discover the Spirit within. This is like discovering Jesus for yourself. Jesus states in the Gospel of Thomas, he who drinks from my mouth becomes like me and I become like him. He also states to follow after the Son of Man within you. He calls himself Son of Man. So it's within you. So it's something that you become. And this is the meaning of Son of God. When you build a personal spiritual relationship with God, this is the meaning of it in Hebrew. But in Greek, hios theou, meaning someone who has been reborn and adopted by God. In Hebrew, the term adopted by God is coming to realize that you are the sons and daughters of the Most High God, that you live in accordance to God. So you have a relationship with God. So this is all Gnostic. So when Christians say, I have a personal relationship with God, they don't know what they're saying. This is Gnostic, a personal relationship with Christ to find your divine double. The term Christanos, little anointed ones, little Christ. Or Christanos, or I think there's another way of pronouncing it. Christiananos. I think that might be the way of pronouncing it in Greek. No bits and pieces, but I'm not a master. So that term for little anointed ones, little Christ, to find Christ within you, to enact the teachings of Jesus into your own life so that you become like Jesus yourself. It's like the saying of, to find Buddha, look within, you become like Buddha. It's the same sort of tradition. And it's funny, the Gnostics even influenced Buddhism as well as Buddhism influencing Gnosticism. We had Mani, who started the first worldwide religion of its time. And this was Manichaeism. He influenced the Buddhist religion and the Hindus that believe that the vegetables and fruit that grow in the light, the sunlight, have more light in them. That's a Gnostic belief from Manichaeism. They were vegetarians. So they believed that everything had a soul in it, and even taking fruit and eating vegetables was pleading from the light, but not as much as meat. So they also believed in reincarnation, but they were very dualist, believing that this world was created by a battle of light and darkness, and then the world was fashioned in. I forgot bits of their beliefs. It's very complicated. Some of their beliefs also survived in eastern parts of Asia. He was killed by the Zoroastrians. They either peeled his skin off of him and they boiled him, or they put him on a pike. We're not 100% too sure how they killed him, which is horrible. The Gnostics always faced persecution. I actually seen someone on there stating not long ago on YouTube that just because someone was persecuted doesn't mean they're right. They completely ignored the crimes that they were doing. So I've commented on there, you've just ignored the fact that in Deuteronomy, it states that Yahweh inherited Israel from El. You find this in Deuteronomy 32 in the Septuagint, and in the Dead Sea Scrolls, you see the lands are divided amongst the Elohim by El Elyon, and according to the divine sons, he gives Yahweh his inherited portion, which is Israel. So a lot of Christians just overlook this stuff. They simply bash, but they ignore their own crimes. They ignore the fact that a Bible came before them. They ignore that there's other texts that are older than their text, that their texts have been edited. The Gospel of Mark, verse 16 from 0.9 onwards up to 2021, they were added in the 4th century. So that's crazy. So that's only with Mary appearing in the tomb, basically, and most of the resurrection stories all missing. So the first people to write about the resurrection were the Gnostics, and they were very symbolic on the resurrection of what it meant. So it was to be reborn in spirit, which was a true meaning. Become deified yourself, become godlike. You are God, which is what Jesus stated. So you're a son of God as well. Nothing separated from God. So kind of like it's all in our heads with a state that nothing exists outside the mind of God, the Godhead, the monad. So we had different beliefs. Some that believed that the demiurge created this whole material world. Others believed he only created the earth and was too stupid to create the universe, which is funny. Others didn't believe this. Others believed that everything around us was created by God, and it was simply either corrupted by the archons or the demiurge, or it was corrupted by us. And it was our job to be restored to our original state, that we fell from the graces of God. So we had all different beliefs of that, which is interesting as well. Some also believe that angels formed this planet and that the demiurge was an angel or just the lieutenant of the angels. So interesting.
Yeah, I was listening to interview with Hogan he had with Carson, and he said that this planet is our Garden of Eden, but worldly governors, we strive. they're the people who's making this beautiful blue planet a hellscape instead. It's all them. It's also the people going along with the agenda being like, I'll just go with the flow. I'll just do as they say. Nobody gets hurt, but the battles you don't face today, you're gonna end up facing them all later. So the sheeple, as I call them.
Yeah. I agree. I was just thinking today, I was out in my wetlands, well, not my wetlands, out in the wetlands meditating, and I contemplated that we're a species that kills our own home, our own planet. We wouldn't take a dump in our own home, like on our floor, but yet we're willing to like defecate the earth before our trash there. And I was thinking, it's crazy. It's like the little of embracing of our connection to even this planet or the universe. It's most people are very asleep. They're stuck in their own little illusions. And it was like that back then in ancient time as well. So we had people like Jesus, Buddha, or even say Thoth, if he existed, or Hermes as well. Some people believe that these were actual figures that were mythologized. Very likely could have been. These figures introduced something that made us think. So, but again, we have even the stories of Jesus. We have both the man and the myth, so we Gnostics, we wouldn't be too upset if, say, Jesus didn't exist, because it's still the symbolic meaning that's more important. So most of Christianity would crumble where we would survive. But even the historical Jesus, they've hidden that. So.
I think it's in Poimandres speaking to Hermes, speaking to Asclepius, Hermes, I guess, that he's gonna reincarnate from time to time here on Earth, which seems fitting when you think about this. People think there were multiple Hermes Trismegistus. It's the same soul-like being, and Jesus just being the latest incarnation that we know of, at least. So it's kind of like, that's why I believe that Jesus was not human, in that not a soul. I believe he was an angel, a god, which makes him, as far as I know, I mean, there's so many claims going back to Hellenistic times, but as far as I know, he's the only god that became human. Otherwise, it's humans becoming gods.
Yeah.
He demoted himself to.
Yeah, even like Alexander the Great, they mostly deified him after his death. Before that, he called himself a demigod, basically. So it's a little bit different. Yes, a god, but it's a demigod. It's something underneath the gods. So that could just be us humans as well, being gifted by God. So different understandings back then as well. But yeah, he was one of the only ones that would be considered God in flesh. A lot of Gnostics believed this too, Simon Magus as well. And that was the whole act of Gnosticism, was becoming deified in flesh, basically. So it's not this whole concept of lightning bolts, but no, it's being control of our mind and being able to be co-creators and bring about something greater that's from within ourselves. So living in accordance to God, the monad, or something incomprehensible. You know, some Gnostics didn't believe that we could actually build a relationship with the Father, with the monad, but rather it was through Sophia or the angels and through Christ that we were able to build a relationship and eventually know God. So we would know of him, but vaguely. So it's interesting. So again, different thoughts and different beliefs. This is pretty sick.
I have this hypothesis, because I've gone through this, but I'll use to it for audience, that Kepler believed he thought the heavens mirrored what was below, like as above so below, and that Helios, or not Helios the god, but the sun. Yeah. I'll just like using the name Helios because it matches up with the planets, you know. Or Sol, I guess, is the Roman. Yeah, Sol. Yep. It's the same in Swedish, actually. Funnily enough. Sol is the father. Then you have Mercury as the Logos, or Christ. And then you have Venus as Sophia, or the Holy Spirit.
Yep.
And then you have the triune concept of, or being, which is mind, body, and spirit. Soul being the soul, sounds the same. And then you have Mercury being the mind, of course. And then you have Venus being, or Sophia, Venus being the body. Yep. And that, I guess, or body is supposed to ascend, because Jesus said he's going to bring heaven down to earth. So ascend your flesh to heaven, or something like that. I don't know. It's just the hypothesis I'm working on here.
Well, there were actually Hellenistic, I forgot the term of the actual name of them, that were Hellenistic Gnostics, if you will. And they had the belief that Jesus was either Adonis or even Helios, one above the sun as well. And they took on that. They're almost sort of anti-Greek, believing that Zeus and other gods were archons, the planets, and that we would ascend beyond all these planets to the true Godhead, which is trippy. So I've forgotten names, not Priscillians. No, I don't think so. It's a certain word. They had women oracles as well. Forgot the word. But yeah, there was a lot of different groups. There was another group too. I forgot their name, traditional name, but they would basically call themselves the Illuminated ones, which is basically where the term Illuminati would come from. So the original ones of the 2nd century. It might have been a couple of creations as well that called themselves that. I forgot which group it was. So we had a lot of different groups, but yeah. Sibyllins, I think Sibyllist was the term. So Sibyllist oracles, I think was. They're like early Greco-Christian Greeks, and yeah, believing ascending beyond the planets, basically. So trippy. But yeah, we had a lot of influencing with different cultures and arguing what a Christian was back then. We know recently that a lot of people converted to Christianity after the destruction of Pompeii, believing that Pompeii was basically another Gomorrah getting destroyed by God, which is pretty interesting as well. A lot of Roman soldiers became Christian as well, being involved in both Christianity and Mithra cults, or even Apollo cults, or also Helios cults as well. We have Constantine, he was also a follower of also Mithra, Helios, and Apollo, as well as apparently being a Christian as well. So interesting.
The
A lot of people took on different gods.
Yeah, I don't agree with the the planets being the archons. Like
Yeah, I'm not one for that. I think it's like, honestly, archons I take for what it means. Politicians, I think they're talking about the corrupt material rulers of their time, and it was coded in because it was dangerous to speak about your rulers. You couldn't speak about your kings or politicians back then. That was death sentence. So clever, you know. That's all there in the language and symbolism, and a lot of them did believe that the archons were their politicians, their leaders, or at least influenced by them, you know, or influenced by their evil. So,
well, I like to call our world leaders demons in charge.
yeah, yeah. I'm not one for politics either, so I see them as basically the archons. You know, I see the demiurge as our own ego, our own lower self, because the ego is not always bad. Like, it can be used as a tool. You know, it's our center of consciousness in a sense, how we take a notice of what we are. Otherwise, we'd be animalistic in a sense. We still carry on our own animalistic urges from when we're fighting off predators and stuff. We don't have to be always on the hunt, you know, or be aggressive. That's why we see this. We see war out in nature. We see thievery in nature as well. Everything's a reflection of what we see. So monkey see, monkey do. You know, that's when we have something that is greater. We have the ability to go beyond ourselves. You know, that's our gift, our spark of humanity. That's what makes us really human. Otherwise, we're just animals, you know. So it's basically be in the eyes of, well, the image of God, or be in the image of the animal, you know.
The Rosicrucians believe that the seven spheres, or the seven heavens, I don't know how they put it, the seven spheres at least, is we descended through the seven spheres. I guess Saturn would be the outer one, which is material, all the way down. And then we have to ascend, we have to ascend through the spheres. And the Rosicrucians believe that you take the gods down to like a human body, then you kill them, then you raise them up again.
Yep. There were even some Gnostics that believed that the 12 disciples of Jesus were Yaldabaoth and his archons trapped into the disciples, and that was how Jesus got rid of them as well, which is pretty interesting as well. We had some bizarre beliefs too, like not just with Gnosticism, but with Orthodoxy as well. We had the Adamites. They were Christian nudists that lived out in nature and had orgies and all sorts. They wanted to live out in nature. Some of them didn't do orgies. Some of them were basically just ones who lived out in nature and basically tried to live like Adam and Eve. So it's interesting. And honestly, if they weren't persecuted and killed, it's sad to say that they possibly would have froze off in the winter. So they could have just left them alone if they wanted to, which is nasty to say, you know. Like, they were innocent. They didn't do anything wrong. They just wanted to be separate. Honestly, if they were living in tents and stuff like that, they would have more of a chance, you know. So trying to live exactly like Adam and Eve, that's taken to the extreme. So we had a lot of different Christians. We had the ironclads that refused to use any symbols. They wouldn't wear a cross. They would have basically just an empty church. So, you know, we even had Gnostics that didn't like symbols. We had the Carpocratians that would place, and they were the first that make portraits of Jesus and Mary Magdalene. They had portraits and bust of Jesus next to Plato, Socrates, Mary Magdalene, sometimes Mary the Virgin, even Apollonius, believing that all these figures were Christ, become like Christ for themselves, but it was just that Jesus was the one who became the begotten son that was adopted by God and basically became his only son, the Logos. And others believed that we were all the sons, or we could all become deified, and it was just that Jesus would be the head one, basically. All different beliefs, you know. So trippy.
I see it this because in the Sumerian Council, sorry about the dog, fucking nails.
That's okay.
In the Sumerian pantheon, there were often 7 gods, and right now, if you look at how we have the color spectrum, there are 7 colors. If you shine it through a prism, you have 7 colors, and I mean, colors are actually a spectrum. Of course, there's an infinite amount of nuances, I guess, and I think that's how the gods, fractal emanations in that of the one mind, which like fractalizes in that kind of way. And then you have different blendings of different colors to create different nuances. Like you have the child of Aphrodite and Mors creates the god Aphrodite, the god of love, and Mors, the god of anger, I guess. That creates the child, the god of jealousy. So you have the mixing there, combination colors and so on.
It's even interesting when you even look at the colors as well. Like with regarding Kappa, they had different colors in their robes too. They would have green, blue, black, some possibly even more purple as well. Hard to say. But in regards with Jesus, they put the cloak of purple on him too, symbolic as well, purple as well, being associated with the Phoenicians too as well, also blue. There's also some that believe that Jesus was Phoenician or half Phoenician. We have a lot of this belief, I would say, would come from a man that was called Parthenos, sorry, my bad. I forgot his name. He was a Roman soldier, half Canaanite, so he was basically half Phoenician and Roman, or he was possibly a Semitic Roman soldier. I actually forget his name, but he's a Roman soldier. But yeah, they around the same time, it was either him or Joseph that was considered to be the father of Jesus. Wish I knew this name. I'll have to look it up. I don't remember the name. It's not Parthena or something there. Parthena, not Parthena. Forgot the word. It's not good. There's a statue of him too.
The thing about forgetting something is the harder you try, the further away it slips.
Yeah.
It
sucks.
Trust that it will come back. Yeah.
Well, it's 9:50 here, so it's pretty late as well. But I know Parthenos was the one for. It's something along there. Parthena. I'm going to look it up on Google. I'll find it straight away, his name. This will go good. Pantera. So Pantera was a half Phoenician, possibly half Phoenician, half Roman. And he fits the time frame of Jesus too. He was, when say Jesus was crucified, I think he'd been in his 40s. I think he died in his 50s. When Jesus was born, he'd probably been 18 years old. You also had the belief that Joseph was his father too. We had, say, the Ebionites, which believed that Jesus was adopted by God, that his regular parents were Joseph and Mary. So that's one of the earliest traditions of that. Who's to say what Joseph was? We don't know, but apparently he come from the line of David. The first mentionings were really of his mother Mary. So if this Roman soldier was Jesus' father, it could also translate to, as his name implies, either son of a panther or son of a virgin. So that would mean that it would be Yeshua, son of a virgin, which is pretty interesting. So that's Yeshua ben Pentara, or some would call that Yeshu, like such as a Talmud, Yeshu ben Pentara. So the Jewish people are also stating as well. But then we have another text with the Jewish rabbi stating, at least we know who our father is, and they call him a Samaritan. But this is mostly insults to Jesus because of his associations. He was one that would step out of the box and would associate with different groups. So he had Canaanites following him, Greeks following him. He had different types of Jews following him. No doubt some of them would have been classified as Phoenician. So we had Canaanites that believed that Jesus was Yahweh in the flesh and that his father was El. So it's very interesting. So I don't know what to make of that one. I personally just think that he was the son of Mary. That's what we 100% know. And that his mother was a temple virgin. So if Joseph was his father, she was placed in the hands of Joseph at 12 or 14. And either something happened to her in the temple, or she was born in normal marriage with Joseph. And it's possible that something did happen in the temple. And the reason I say why it's possible is because in the Talmud it states that a young girl being free can still be a virgin after the priest lays with her. So that's pretty nasty. So who knows? We don't know. But whether it's a story of Pantara, that's an interesting story too, because there were ones who believed that Pantara either loved Mary and joined the Roman army in order to be allowed to marry Mary under Roman law, or that he took advantage of Mary and Jesus was born out of wedlock. And if that's the case, then it makes Jesus more beautiful because he was born out of hatred and chose to do love, which is fine. I have no problems with that. But again, it's very likely that Jesus was possibly mixed. And again, like the Canaanites were mixing their blood. Jesus also spent time in Egypt, so it's likely that he picked up the Greek language there too, or where he was living. Greek was the English of the world back then. So the word synagogue comes from the Greek language. The Greeks borrowed their language from the Phoenicians, basically the alphabet-wise. So they would be the introductions of that. So it was borrowing. The Greeks borrowed the image of Zeus with the long hair, long hair and long beard. So that came from El Elyon being the wise old god, the father of the gods. So they borrowed that, which is cool. So there's a lot of borrowing no matter what you do. So I think even Jesus had borrowing of different traditions and figured out saying this is what's right. So the Jews were trying to stone him as well, his own people. They would scream out blasphemy. But again, this supports the faction of different Jews. So different beliefs of what God was and who they worship. I see Jesus worshipping El, but I think this El that he's worshipping is a combination of El and Asherah. So both masculine and feminine. So when you go to the Ebionites, they also mention that the Holy Spirit as well is feminine. So interesting. And they mention about how God's feminine aspect is the earth. So we have the Greeks believing that Gaia was this earth, and earth was her personification. So not actually Gaia itself, but it's the personification of her. So meaning that she's a spirit or something, or in a different realm. And this is a whatever. It's weird. So, you know.
Yeah. So the Sumerians, Anu had multiple wives. He had Namu, and the ones I know of is Namu and Antu, and Antu and Anu were sometimes conflated together, that they were like an androgynous origin to that couple. So if you look at the way I see it, the way I put it together, that you have the monad, the unity, the one. I guess it's many because you can't have one without having many. So it's, on definition that way. But anyways, once duality was created, you have positive and negative. And since everything was created from nothing, the Rosicrucians believe this. When you put the minus and everything positive and everything negative together, you get nothing. So it counteracts, and that's where you have Anu and Antu, the positive and the negative.
I also wouldn't mind reading something if I can find something too. I got something here from the Gospel of John. It's from a bit of my translation too. So I show a very Gnostic element, and it's been very much censored in the English version, of course. So I kept a lot of it in Greek, in some of it, and just to certain words, which is pretty cool. So this is in the beginning of chapter 1. So this comes from the Carpocratians. So their Trinity, which was united, was God, or the monad, Logos, and Zoe, and you still find this in the beginning. So it's a little bit different to the standard creation you would find in the Old Testament. So it's got here, in the beginning there was Logos, and Logos was to God, and Logos was God. This one in the beginning was with God. All things were made through him, and without him not one thing was made. With him was Zoe, and the Zoe was the light of men. So Zoe not only just means life, but it also means the life that you have when you have a spiritual relationship with God. So again, this is all very, very Gnostic, which is pretty cool. So the Carpocratians had a huge influence on John, but I don't just see Carpocratians having an influence on it. I also see the Mandaeans, so followers of John, or at least converting to Christianity, having a little influence in it. That's why I see a special place for John, but he's not as great as Jesus. But Jesus stating, none is more worthy than John unless you enter heaven. So, which is interesting as well. I believe it's also in John that I know what it does say about Jesus, the Good Shepherd, too, as well. So, which is pretty cool. But check this out. So this is in Jesus, the Good Shepherd. This is in 10.8. Jesus states, all who came before me were thieves and predators, or translates to pirates, rebels, robbers, or bandits, laestace, and the sheep did not listen to them. I am the door. By me whoever enters in will be saved, and will enter and leave and find peace. The thief does not come if not to steal, or translates to take away, and to sacrifice and to destroy. I came that they may have life and have it abundantly. I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his soul for my sheep. And even when you look at Sophia, she gives you her soul. So again, you have Gnosticism here. Jesus is challenging the authority of Yahweh. He's stating that all who came before me are human traffickers. They're predators of their own people, rebels of their own people. So we have something interesting here. This is why they hate Jesus and why the Talmud has disgusting stuff in it, which also backs up my claim, and why they hated Jesus, because he stole their prostitutes, he stole their wives. So he was protecting them. This is why he also states when they come to arrest him, why'd you come out here to arrest me like I was a laestace like you? Which is interesting. But I want to go to his death, specifically in the Gospel of John, because I have it here, which is pretty cool. I'm just looking it up here. I also found this too. So this is about the Greeks. So this is 12.20. Some Greeks see Jesus, and there were some Greeks among those who came up to worship at the festival. These then came to Philip from Bethsaida or Galilee and asked him, saying, Sir, we want to see Jesus. Philip comes and tells Andrew. Andrew and Philip come and tell Jesus. And Jesus answers them, saying, The hour has come that the Son of Man should be glorified. Amen, or translates to truly. Amen, or truly, again. I say to you, unless a grain of wheat falls into the ground and dies, it remains alone. But if it dies, it bears much fruit. He who loves his soul frees it, and he who hates his soul, this world keeps it for eternal life. If I minister them, they follow me, and where I am, there I am. There is also the minister. If I minister them, the Father will honor them. So we have here Greeks seeking Jesus. We have another thing that, disciples actually worry that Jesus would leave them. So this also suggests that he spoke Greek, that he would speak Aramaic, as well as Hebrew, and possibly even Persian if Zoroastrians were following him. So we have a very educated man. And we even have a scene when Jesus was crucified. Pilate was quite shocked he was already dead. And with Gnosis from the centurion, he received knowledge of Jesus' death. Gnosis from the centurion, so secret knowledge from the centurion. Something screams red flag as well whenever you read those sort of text. But I definitely want to read up about when he's on the cross, because the Gospel of John has something interesting in here. I believe it's John that has the antidote. That's what I really want to read. Yeah, we'll check this one out. This is in the death of Jesus, but first I'll put before this. So this is in 19.25 when Jesus is crucified. I want to read this part first. And his mother and mother's sister stood by the cross of Jesus, Maria, the wife of Clopas, and Mary Magdalene. When Jesus saw his mother there and the disciple whom he loved standing nearby, he said to his mother, Dear woman, here is your child. Then he said to the disciple, Behold your mother. And from that time the disciple received her in the same. Or it could also translate, him or it. But here we only have women mentioned. The disciple he loved, Mary Magdalene. But now the death of Jesus. After this, when Jesus saw that everything already being done, that the scriptures may be finished, he says, I thirst. A vessel had been set there of oxos, and a sponge filled with oxos, and they brought the antidote to his mouth. When he had received the oxos, Jesus said, It is done, and he bowed his head and gave up the spirit. You don't immediately go down after drinking something. They've planted something here. Now we go into something. Here's some censorship. So Mary goes to the tomb with spices, not in John. Someone else. It's Simon. All right, let's go find this. No, mine is Joseph. Joseph does it. All right. After this, Joseph of Arimathea, who was the disciple of Jesus, but in secret of fear of the Jews, which you do find a lot of, and the Jews, a lot in these texts, so symbolize that these people weren't Jewish that wrote it, asked Pilate that the body of Jesus might be removed, and Pilate gave him permission, so he came and took away his body. Now, I left it this one, but I should have put in here because I didn't realize that word soma at this time. With my other translations, I do mention it. So eventually I will go over this and put that down. This can translate to living body of Jesus. So it doesn't mean he's dead. It can mean just a carcass or a mass of anything as well, but it can mean a living body. He was accompanied by Nicodemus, the man who earlier had visited Jesus at night. Nicodemus brought a mixture of myrrh and aloe vera, about 75 pounds worth. Taking Jesus' body, the two of them wrapped it with spices in the very custom for Jews to bury their dead. No, it's not. They wash it with water. That's it. So they've replaced Mary here with two men. So there's some censorship here because it realizes the one that Jesus loves is Mary Magdalene. It's not John. John didn't write John, and Luke didn't write Luke. It even mentions in the beginning of Luke, many have tried to come across these accounts. So ones with authority or given authority wrote this basically. So it's trippy. Then you go to Mark with the crucifixion scene, and it mentions they tried to give him a love potion. They were trying to give him an erection, and this is because when he saved the kids, they want to make him look dirty on the cross. So they want to mock him. When they put the crown of thorns on him, thorny in Greek, this is meaning from the acacia tree. So that was believed to be a part of the Ark of the Covenant. So it's all symbolism here, that they're mocking him and mocking his culture, his heritage, and even being naked was a sin in Jewish culture. So they're also trying to make fun of him as well. So even the sea sponge itself is symbolic for being from the murky womb or the murky sea, the mother of the deep. So everything's symbolism as well, being coated in purple, being coated in royalty, even though they were mocking him. So the sponge itself that they're giving him, what they don't talk about, this was a toilet brush for Romans. They would use the sea sponge to wipe their butts, and then they would dip a stick with the sponge in a bucket of vinegar and water and leave it there for the next person to use. So pretty nasty. So they were also trying to, when they gave him a potion in the Mark text, the love potion with myrrh, they're also trying to, drug him as well. So they're doing nasty stuff to him. So this is pretty hardcore. What did he do? He healed people. He said, love your neighbor. He challenged the system. So that's what got him killed. You don't get killed for starting a new religion or anything like that. You get killed when you challenge the authority of the old religions, or even if you're the same religion, you're just starting a new way of thinking. You're not so much going to get killed for that. You might get mocked for it or slapped here. But it's when you rebel against that system, which is what he did. He's also called them leistes. So he called them predators in front of the kids, in front of all those who were serving. And he stops them from taking those vessels out in Mark 16, which is censored into English. That also translates to merchandise. So the holy relics as well, the temple narcotics that they'll use, the incense, possibly even the Ark of the Covenant. There's some Jews that believe that when Jesus went into the temple, he stole the sacred name of God, and that's how he did his miracles. More likely, he took their temple drugs, and that's what he was doing. He gave it to the people, said, this is how they're healing you, because holy oil back then was expensive. I also think that when he was at the temple, I think he probably looked at the Ark of the Covenant. It's very likely, because that's where it was. He thought he was on a holy mission. Could be right then and then he believed he was the Messiah, for all we know. As again mentioned previously, when I mentioned some people believe that even with the Gospel of Judas, with Judas handing over Jesus, that Jesus has told him to do it. Some believe that this was Jesus planning this. There's a movie called The Passover Plot that have Jesus planning that if he didn't get put as king, it's not just a movie, it's also a book. So it's written by a scholar that this is his theory, that if he wasn't placed as king during the temple scene, that if he seemed to have resurrected from the dead, then he would have been God in the Romans' eyes and Greeks' eyes. Who knows? I like that theory. I think it's pretty cool. That's, again, theories. That's what we have mostly. It's all theory. It's what you have to believe. I'm not going to tell you how to believe or anything like that. I'm just going to mention little things of fun.
I listened to your video on Revelation. In Matthew, I mean, I guess you could say it was from the later forgery. He mentions the day of judgment a lot of times in Matthew.
Matthew's the most Jewish.
Yeah, what would the day of judgment be?
Resurrection of the dead, or the coming of the kingdom of God. So basically, that's why I mentioned it's very Jewish. So they would believe that God would have the souls and soul raise themselves in their old bodies. They would be judged and deemed to be worthy in heaven, being given a new spiritual body that's perfect, that doesn't age, doesn't get sick, etc. And if not, they turn into dust. So that was, to them, a lot of them was day of judgment, was the last days. Not all of them had this view, though. Some believed that the soul simply went to heaven and otherwise reincarnated. Some Jews believed that as heresy. Even with Christianity, the belief that your soul went straight to heaven was regarded as heresy. That's why a lot of them didn't like the Book of Enoch. So in other cases, the last days of judgments was when Messiah came, and there was a big, glorious fight, and the Zealots, for instance, believed the Messiah would be leading them against the Romans, and then God would judge all the souls, or etc. So, but depending on the belief as well. So that's interesting. Then you had the Christian view of the Day of Judgment, which is basically Jesus fighting the battle of Satan as well. And even the belief of fallen angels, that was originally Gnostic. Simon Magus had this belief of fallen angels, and that Yahweh was one of them. So that's trippy. So that demiurge was a fallen angel, just one of the leaders of them, basically. So it's pretty trippy.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at Revelation, you would have to. I put Yahweh as being Enlil in the Sumerian pantheon. It says Satan, or the dragon, Satan and his angels.
Yeah.
His angels. So that makes me think, like, how would some random angel just get an army? It makes sense that he was like the lieutenant, like the general or something that rebelled.
Some Gnostics did believe that Satan was the ruler of this world as well. Some didn't use the term Yahweh, or didn't use the term Yahweh off, I was meant to say, or the demiurge. They just used Satan in some cases as well, which is pretty trippy. But even some with regarding Satan, when you go into the Pharisees, which were the Jews that hated Jesus, they believed that Satan was an angel that served God, and that his job was to seduce mankind away from Yahweh, so that way mankind had free will. Then you had the Sadducees that didn't believe in any angels. They didn't believe in Satan. They believed that God was totally unknowable, and once you died, that was it. You turned into dust. Then you had the Zealots. Some believed that Satan was basically either the inclination of humans to do evil, or was an angel that served Yahweh. But then you have the Old Testament that basically states that either David called the census of the people of Israel was Yahweh. So both of these cases would be meaning Satan being the adversary or accuser. So this means that it's not always a bad thing. And we have Yahweh also being Satan. And this would match the Essenes that believe that the role of Satan was basically served by Yahweh. And then, so similar with being the judger or seducer, which is trippy. And then some Essenes completely rejected Yahweh, viewed him as the devil, because they viewed those who worship Yahweh as the corruptors and usurpers of the temple. So they believed that they were the original priests of the temple that got thrown out. Basically, the templehood got corrupted, and they become a mixture of Greek and Zoroastrian, which is kind of funny because you have the word Parsi, which basically means Persians. The Sadducees would call this to the Pharisees. They called Parsis. They're saying, you're not Jewish, you're Persian. And then the Pharisees would go off and say, you're not Jewish, you're Greek. So they were all fighting amongst themselves, which is hilarious. So in my eyes, the Essenes had a lot of it right. A lot of their traditions would come from Egypt as well, being ritual washing, so baptism. So they were the ones practicing baptism. You also had the Samaritans, the Samaritan Jews. They practiced baptism, but they only did it when they were going to do their ritual ceremonies or prayer, basically. So they didn't wash themselves as much as the Essenes. And I think that's why they were healthier. Good to wash yourself. It's good to have a shower, you know? So it shows these other ones were dirty. So I even had a description that said, "Oh, Jesus was poor. It's like he had lice." Well, I was thinking, well, don't take baptism into account. So it's likely that he was washing himself. He had the lady or Mary Magdalene, depending on which gospel account you read, pour oil on him. So Mary Magdalene, being a previous priestess, following him, is anointing him as a Messiah. The disciples are there as witness, you know. So some of them are like, what's going on? Because they didn't understand, because they're all different types of Jews following him that are arguing over each other. They're not one type of Jew. So, which is funny. So he's bringing unity, you know. That's crazy, which is real cool. So he managed to get groups of people to stop hating themselves and each other. The campfire did the same too. They managed to cause a little bit of peace between Muslims, Jews, and Catholics. And then the crusade happened against the campfire, and then because they wanted to get rid of them. The reason why is because the Pope wanted to launch another crusade against the Muslims. You couldn't have anyone that was causing peace between them. It's like, nah, we're getting rid of them, then we're going to war. So it's like, we always copped it, you know. Gnosticism is the answer to all the Abrahamic faiths, you know.
Yeah, for sure. I was wondering about the word Sela. That's used. Sela, yeah, that's used in I think in the Melchizedek scrolls and the Qumran, like the Dead Sea Scrolls or the Nag Hammadi. It uses the word Sela, and it's left untranslated. I don't know what it means.
Might look it up so I can see what origin it comes from. Sounds Greek. Pretty sure it'd be Greek. I could be wrong. Could be Coptic. Is it spelled C-E-L-A?
S-E-L-H. A-H.
A-H. Shalah. Or Silah.
Oh.
It's Hebrew. Never mind. Sorry. Shalah. I'm trying to think what it means. Because I think Hashem is another word for God. It could be another word for God. I'm just looking up here, actually. To lift up and exalt. That's what it means. It's Hebrew. I thought I heard the name before. I was thinking, Selah sounds good, but then I was, Shalah, that's Hebrew. As soon as I heard it, I realized, I'm like, But I had to look up what it was. So, yeah, it's to lift up and to exalt. So, to rise, basically. So, yeah, which is pretty cool. Very mystic.
Yeah, it's from the... I find it a lot when I read these, Dead Sea Scrolls and stuff. Sila, I don't even know how you pronounce it.
Even the Dead Sea Scrolls, they're fascinating because you have some written in Aramaic, Hebrew, and Greek. It's like, wow, you know? So a lot of people don't talk about something that's written in Greek. They keep that hush-hush. They don't want you to know that there's diversities with anything. It's even with which is hilarious, the Septuagint is the oldest complete copy of the Hebrew text that we have that was copied from those Hebrew texts that are now lost to time. So these Greek texts are interesting, but it's deemed one of the most dangerous books in history. But the funny thing is, Ptolemy, or how you pronounce his name, who ordered the construction of it, when all these Jewish people were arguing over the text, they're like, nah, this one's corrupt, this one's corrupt. He's like, I don't care. Either put the text in together, get along, otherwise I'm going to do it myself. And they freaked out over that. So you had all these different rabbis from different tribes getting together, compiling the Old Testament to one book, which was never done before because all the Jewish people had their own different texts and were arguing over them. You had the Essenes had their own different types of Essenes. You had the Sadducees that only accepted the first 5 books of Moses, which some Jews only accepted the first 5 books, rejected prophets, rejected any other work. You had others that had extensive laws. You had some that picked and chose their text. Same thing with Christianity. They were sharing around text until Irenaeus said that there's only 4, you know? So multiple different authors. There's probably up to like 32, 56 authors in the whole Bible, whatever. So
yeah,
a lot of authors.
And God knows how many scribes adding, adjusting, maybe a slip of error, spelling error or something, you know.
Well, I believe for the Septuagint, that was either 82 or 112 scribes all up that worked on it.
Isn't the number 70? 72?
I think maybe 82. I think it might be 72 as well. Like there's something as well. Because there's also the tribes. Yeah, something like that. because there were so many from each tribe. So from 12 tribes, there were so many from each one or whatever. From 12 tribes of Israel or whatever. But then you would have had other sects, so it's weird. Not exactly 100% too sure of the number, but I know it was a massive project. So it could have been 82 or 72, could have been 62, one of those ones, but a lot of them. So
Yeah.
that's hardcore.
Yeah, that's a lot. In the Nag Hammadi scroll scriptures, they found Hermetic texts as well.
Yep, and they also found Jewish Christian text as well. They found Greek philosophy, Zoroastrian texts as well, and some texts from ancient Egypt, which would be the Hermetic ones as well. So yeah, they weren't just burying their own texts; they were beautiful. They were trying to bury everything that the Catholic Church were trying to burn. They were trying to burn writings of Plato. That's why they buried it. So
Yeah, I'm surprised that Jesus never ever in the Bible and scriptures we have speaks about the Nephilim.
Yeah, well, it doesn't really surprise me as well because, as I mentioned, a lot of them didn't really. A lot of Jews didn't believe it. Some did. So I think Jesus didn't really probably believe in the thing. I think he more probably believed that if he did, I think he would have just seen the fallen angels basically as lesser beings being ruled by Yahweh, basically, if he did believe in fallen angels. He definitely called Yahweh the devil, and the only Jews back then that believed in the devil were the Gnostic Jews, some Essene sects. So the Pharisees didn't, the Sadducees didn't, the Samaritans didn't, unless they were mystics, they did. So that's interesting. The Zealots didn't. So
have you ever read that passage about the Nephilim in the New International Version? It says the Nephilim were on the earth in those days when the when the sons of God came in unto the daughters of men, and they bore giants to them, the same of which were the heroes of old, men of renown. Calls them heroes.
Yeah, and some people just believe that's all they were. Some people believe they were either from angels or again they were gifted by God. That would come from the Greek Hellenistic tradition, or gifted by angels or lesser gods, etc. So yeah, but it's definitely a borrowing going on.
Some even believe that that Noah was of that Nephilim lineage, from judging on his birth with a pale white hair and
Yeah, some Gnostics even didn't like Noah. They believed that he was a servant of the demiurge, and Yahweh basically cracks his shit, and Noah says, "Who's these other people?" He goes, "I don't know these people. They're not from me." So it's interesting. And they believe that Sophia lifted up the Gnostics in the cloud, or the descendants of Seth. So yeah, I'd read different traditions in regarding it, of their understanding, the problems of the text as well. But I see a lot of that was due to the persecution, because they had to evolve. They changed their beliefs in order to try to be a bit more popular amongst Catholic crowds to stop them from killing them, but it didn't really work, unfortunately. But they were the most popular form of Christianity. They were writing beautiful works. So it's interesting, even the belief of what demiurge was. I personally think that when Jesus called their God the devil, I don't think he believed demiurge was this basically just God. I think he believed that he was either ignorant or he was evil. So that's up to what they say. But for them to call the devil, that's definitely not someone that's just ignorant. To be called a devil means that he was on a belief that Yahweh was corrupt as hell. And I think that he would got that from the Essene traditions that believe that they corrupted the temple, and so he was one for that. I think that's why he avoids the temple in a lot of cases. He did go to it, but mostly he's preaching outdoors, teaching people to go out in the wilderness to connect with God by themselves alone. So again, it seems red flags. I definitely don't see him worshipping Yahweh, as again, he wouldn't state about his own father, calling it the devil. And for him to even mention the devil, that shows Gnosticism. It doesn't show a Pharisee belief at all, because they didn't believe in the devil. They didn't believe in hell. He doesn't mention hell. He mentions Gehenna, though, which was a place that the Canaanites practiced human sacrificing, child sacrificing, not just to Baal, but also to Yahweh. And not all people sacrificed there. Some Jews, Hellenistic Jews, and Canaanites, and Hellenistic Canaanites cremated their dead there. So they buried their families with honor to burn them, to send them to the afterlife. Others buried their dead there because they rejected cremation. Some of them were very Jewish in that sense, believing their body would resurrect on the day of judgment, the day of the resurrection of the dead. So to not have a body back then was considered scary because you'll be a wandering spirit. So when Jesus is saying Gehenna, it's like, oh, my body will be burnt in Gehenna, so scary to them. Not just that, but the Romans had a fire there later on. So by the end of the 1st century BC era, basically the only people cremating their dead there were Romans and Greeks. So the Jews and Canaanites stopped it. So during that time, the reason why, because they would have viewed it as corrupted. They would have thought it's like, you've ruined this place. Why? Because the Romans were burning the rubbish there. They were also cremating their dead on a separate part. But where the old burials were, they were putting the dead bodies of criminals and burning it. So they corrupted the place. So that's what Jesus is saying about the soul being basically placed there. It's like, well, your body will be burnt there, but not the soul. So have fear of the one who has the power to destroy your soul. These people can only destroy your flesh. And so it's very Gnostic, very Essene. So the mortal soul, it's very Essene, very Gnostic, the disregarding of the material world, which is what Jesus is teaching. Again, it's all screaming Gnosticism, Gnosis. He even states, woe to the scribes and the law keepers, for they hide Gnosis. They themselves have not entered, nor let others enter. So he's talking about they're not letting others enter within. They're stopping their spiritual growth.
Yeah, the punishment for sin in the Bible is always, it isn't torture, it's death. That is the hell, the second death is what it's called over and over again. Second death. This concept of eternal torture in hell is like pure propaganda, straight up.
Yeah, 100%. And not all, like, what's it called? Christians even believed in hell. Some did as well, early Christians, but they believed that was an eternal place. They believed that God was loving, that you would eventually be forgiven, and your soul was just there to purify itself. So we had Gnostics also believed in purgatory. Catholics stole that too, which is hilarious. And no one really likes to believe in purgatory, so they stole an unpopular belief basically as well. Some believed it was like a place that either regular Christians would go to purify themselves, or people who basically lingered between good and darkness. So it's interesting as well, that belief as well. So some believe that hell was this place here, to reincarnate here again. So you've done something wrong, basically, or you chose to come here to wake others, so the first become last. They were the two concepts, Other Gnostics believed that some souls wouldn't make it to the Pleroma, that some souls would be destroyed, turned to dust. Others believed that every single soul would return there. So vast. Some believe that we had to make this world heaven before we could return to the Pleroma. So vast different beliefs, which is pretty cool.
Yeah. So one myth states that Anu and Ki were first inseparable. So Anu, heaven, and earth, Ki, were inseparable. Yeah. But then Enlil, Yahweh, cleaved them apart, creating the material world or plane we live in. So that's...
Well, some people like Baal and Yahweh also replaced what's it called, Anu with Enlil, which is interesting as well. So, and that would be around Babylonian times as well. So they would also replace their gods and change their gods too. So it's interesting. So there was definitely borrowing from the Sumerians as well. And we also have the Hittites as well. They were worshipping El and Yahweh as well. So that's very interesting. The Hittites were rivals of Egypt too. So possibly they had an alliance with some Canaanite tribes that were warring them. We also had the sea people that were raiding Egypt. Some of them worship Yahweh too, So it's pretty cool, pretty trippy. And we also had Jews that believed that these gods, like the head of their god or the head of their god, were both the same gods. That would be considered heresy now. We had some Jews and Greeks that believed Zeus and Yahweh were the same god, and that would also include Anu, so which is trippy. So, and Hermes as well being Thoth. So it wasn't anything new. It was like we had the same god, it's that we just got a different name of it. And that was pretty common back then too.
Hermanubis, they have like the synchronism they put together, like different gods even make all these strange combinations.
Most
so
definitely.
We're coming up on 2 hours now, and I think that's pretty good length for a podcast. People have other things to do.
Yeah. My legs are getting pretty sore as well with my calf.
Yeah. So
Sitting
so
down.
let people know where they can find you.
Oh, they can find me on YouTube under Spiritual Level of Being. They can also find me on Facebook, the same name. Also, my group Gnosis Within. You'll also find Simeon's post there. I was accepted on Spiritual Level Being and Gnosis Within. And there's also the Gnostic Union. You can find me on there and other Gnostics that's still getting worked on that site though as well. We'll have a website on there. So yeah, Facebook as well. I'm on Twitter. I don't really like Twitter much. X now. So mostly on YouTube is where I'm mostly at. That's where I like to share my goodies. So I like to give free information there, and they can download my translations too, along with the Greek originals. They're free. I don't charge for that. That's free as it should be. Some people copyright their Bibles. I don't believe that. That's evil.
Well, it's been fantastic, super interesting. I learned a bunch of Bible history here. We'll have to do this again sometime.
It'll be an honor. Thank you for having me, Simeon. I really enjoyed this. And many blessings to all your followers and lots of gnosis and blessings for all of them.